Hey, what's up? Welcome back to your channel name. This time, we're going to dive into a story that will make you think twice before walking alone at night. Grab some snacks, turn off the lights, and listen closely. Elena Madsen's life had always followed a flat, predictable line. Since moving to a quiet suburb outside Oslo, she had lived each day with calm repetition, caring for her only son, Leo. Her mornings consisted of preparing breakfast, driving him to school, and returning home to work as an illustrator for children's books. Nothing about her days ever broke the rhythm, exactly how she liked it after years of grappling with wounds she rarely spoke of. But that morning, everything shifted. It started with a letter. No stamp. No return address. Just an aged envelope, yellowed at the edges, pushed neatly under her door. Its presence felt wrong, as though someone had slipped it in while time itself paused. In the corner, barely visible, was a faint stamp that simply read, Prague. Inside was a single sheet of fragile paper, creased and on the verge of tearing. The handwriting, shaky, rushed, was unfamiliar yet strangely deliberate. Elena read the note again and again. There were only a few words, but they struck deep, Leo Madsen. Followed by a chilling sentence that carried the weight of a curse or a desperate warning from a mind unraveling. His blood will be claimed. Before it's too late. The air around her thickened, as if the letter had stirred something ancient from beneath her walls. The paper smelled of dust and rain-soaked earth, the kind only found in places forgotten by time. Elena stood frozen, the world around her turning quieter than silence. She couldn't stop staring at the letter. Rain began to patter gently against the window, casting watery shadows across her kitchen floor. The scent of her untouched coffee turned cold in the air, forgotten. The only thing she heard was the ticking of the wall clock, now suddenly louder, like a countdown echoing in her bones. The name, Leo, etched in ink, sent tremors through her. This couldn't be a coincidence. No one knew. No one was ever told. Elena had chosen to become a mother alone. A decision that led her across borders, to a quiet clinic in Central Europe where confidentiality was absolute. The donor's identity was sealed, the details buried. She'd done everything to ensure her child came into the world untouched by the weight of any past. Yet here it was, a letter from a stranger, invoking her son's name, and laced with a sentence so archaic it seemed to have been lifted from some forgotten text. His blood will be claimed. It was not a threat in the traditional sense. It felt older. Like an invocation. Like a debt that had waited in the shadows, patient, knowing exactly where to find them. Elena felt herself drawn into the words, not just with fear, but with something worse, recognition. As though a door she thought she'd sealed had been quietly opened behind her. The days that followed became a blur. She attempted to discard the letter more than once, tossing it into the trash with a strange, urgent guilt. Yet every time, her hands would retrieve it again. Folded. Unfolded. Studied like a relic from a forgotten ritual. Something about it wouldn't let her go. She tried to search for clues. His blood will be claimed, brought up nothing concrete online. No myths. No quotes. No folklore. It felt like a phrase that existed solely to haunt her, inscribed in an old tongue that spoke to something beyond modern comprehension. She started to feel eyes on her when she walked past mirrors. Shadows in corners where none should be. Nights brought dreams, visions of narrow stone corridors, cracked cathedral glass, and a child's sob echoing across vaulted ceilings. In those dreams, the voice calling out wasn't Leo's. It was older, lost, and desperately trying to return. Elena tried to rationalize it all, stress, imagination, unresolved trauma, but none of it explained the paper's texture, or the fact that it had arrived without a sound. The ink on the letter didn't smudge, no matter how often she touched it. Its presence felt alive. Somewhere deep down, a part of her knew. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't random. The letter had crossed time and distance to reach her, and it knew who Leo truly was. It started a week after the letter arrived. Elena would hear murmurs at night from Leo's room. Not nightmares or restless mumbles, but fluent speech. Whispered in a language she didn't recognize, soft, rhythmic, and terrifyingly assured. She recorded one of the sessions with her phone. On playback, her blood chilled. The voice that spoke sounded nothing like a 7-year-old boy. The cadence was mature, deliberate, almost ritualistic. Between the phrases, there was a rasping breath, low and hollow, like another presence breathing just behind the microphone. In the daylight, Leo seemed unchanged. But a growing stillness clung to him. He stopped laughing at his cartoons. He sat longer in front of the window, staring at nothing. One day, Elena noticed his notebook filled with symbols, circles within circles, lines piercing through them like daggers. She traced one symbol online. It resembled an old Slavic sigil used in pre-Christian pagan rites. A symbol of binding. The realization hit her with terrifying clarity. Something had latched onto her son. Something that didn't belong in this time or this place. And it was calling him back. She could no longer ignore the signs. The house felt colder. The silence, heavier. She knew she couldn't wait for answers to come, they wouldn't. Not unless she went after them herself. So, she packed a suitcase. She found her passport buried beneath old photo albums and dust-covered memories. She bought 2 tickets, Oslo to Prague, Friday morning. One for her, and one for Leo. She couldn't leave him behind. Whatever this was, it was already part of him. Elena didn't tell anyone of her plan. She left a vague note with the neighbor to feed the cat. She kept the reason to herself. Because there was no way to explain it. Not yet. The flight was uneventful. But the moment they stepped into Prague, something in the air shifted. The city, with its cobbled streets and baroque spires, wore a beautiful mask. But beneath it, Elena felt something watching. Old eyes hidden in the stone. Whispers slipping through alleys lined with centuries of forgotten prayers. She didn't come for tourism. She came to unearth something that had been waiting. Something buried not just in history, but in blood. The descent into Václav Havel Airport was smooth, but the moment their feet touched the soil of Prague, Elena felt a pressure settle on her chest, as if something had been holding its breath and now exhaled upon their arrival. The weather was gray, overcast, the sun hidden behind a thick wall of motionless clouds. It felt like the entire city had paused, waiting for them. She had booked a modest apartment near the old town square. It was close to landmarks, but far enough from the constant buzz of tourists. The building was pre-war, perhaps even older. The kind of place that had watched centuries pass through its windows. As they stepped into the stairwell, Elena felt an immediate sense of unease. The walls were stained with age, the steps groaned beneath every footstep. She tried to dismiss it as anxiety, but even Leo's silence felt heavier here. Her son, once so expressive and curious, now walked beside her like a ghost. His eyes wandered aimlessly, sometimes locking onto nothing, as if something invisible moved just out of sight. At night, he no longer mumbled in strange tongues. He slept in absolute silence, unnaturally still, his breathing so faint she found herself checking if he was alive. One morning, she caught him standing by the window, staring across the rooftops at a church tower in the distance. His hand was raised, fingers gently touching the cold glass. When she asked what he was doing, he didn't turn to her. He simply lowered his hand and walked away. Something about Prague had awakened what was inside him. And whatever it was, it already knew the city better than she ever would. The city's historical archive stood like a mausoleum for forgotten truths, high, gray, and solemn in its architecture. Elena had called ahead and claimed to be researching her ancestry, hoping it would grant her enough access to browse the deeper records. It worked. An elderly librarian with unreadable eyes handed her a visitor's pass and led her to a quiet wing that smelled of parchment and rain. She started with the donor records from the fertility clinic she had used. Names had been sealed, but there had been rumors online of heritage leaks involving older European sperm banks. That thread led her to a surname she had seen only once, Rockvan, a Bohemian name linked to a bloodline erased during the early 1900s for reasons that had nothing to do with politics. What she found disturbed her. In the margins of a legal document, scribbled in penmanship far more modern than the rest, was a red-inked phrase, "The Rockvan blood must not be awakened again." She dug deeper. The Rockvans had ties to an obscure sect of spiritualists who believed that certain bloodlines served as vessels, not just for spirits, but for ancient consciousnesses predating written history. Elena couldn't fully grasp what it meant, but the pattern was clear: wherever the Rockvan name appeared, strange tragedies followed. Vanished children. Unexplained deaths. Sealed records. Leo, it seemed, wasn't just a child of circumstance. His blood was part of something that had been hidden, buried deliberately, because what it carried wasn't meant to return. In one of the leather-bound volumes, tucked between census pages from the early 20th century, she found it, a photograph, sepia-toned and cracked at the edges. A family portrait, standing in front of a large manor that no longer existed. Her eyes passed over the figures quickly until they landed on the smallest one. A boy. No more than 7. Dressed in period clothing, he stood stiffly beside an older man in priest robes. Elena's heart dropped. It was Leo. Not someone resembling him, Leo. Every feature. Every nuance. The same quiet stare, the same uneven part in his hair, the mole near his left eye. She stared until the image blurred, then cleared her eyes and stared again. There was no mistake. The caption beneath read, "Rockvan Manor, Prague District, 1913, Ceremony of Binding." Elena sat frozen for a long time. That photograph was taken over a century ago. Yet her son's face stared back at her, unaged. Unchanged. She took a photo of it with her phone, then hid the original back in the book. She couldn't bring herself to steal it, but leaving it behind felt like walking away from a buried confession. Somehow, her son had been here before. And he hadn't come alone. Later that afternoon, while sorting through Leo's drawings, Elena found it again, the same structure repeated again and again. A church. Gothic spires. A cracked bell tower. A stained glass window shaped like an eye. He had drawn it from every angle, as if trying to remember something half forgotten. But each time, the details were eerily precise. She began showing the sketch to locals, cafe owners, even a tour guide. Most didn't recognize it. One old woman, however, visibly paled when she saw the sketch. She whispered something under her breath, something in Czech, and walked away without answering. Eventually, she found it. Hidden beyond the tourist districts, near a stretch of abandoned rail line, stood the crumbling ruins of a chapel surrounded by bramble. A rusted gate blocked the path, marked with a sign that read "Nevstupujte," "Do not enter." The moment they reached it, Leo stopped. His hand clenched hers tightly. Not out of fear, but recognition. He knew this place. He had drawn it not from imagination, but from memory. Despite the sign, the gate swung open with surprising ease. The path beyond was overgrown, the air unnaturally still. They stepped inside the skeletal remains of the church, its roof partially collapsed, ivy creeping across the walls like veins. As they walked, Elena heard whispers, not from Leo, but from the building itself. It was as though the walls breathed. The air was colder inside, not just due to shade, but something deeper, older. Leo walked without hesitation. He led her to the altar, where time had broken away the marble to reveal a hollow beneath. With trembling hands, Elena pushed aside the moss and debris. Beneath lay a narrow trapdoor, bound in iron. She opened it. The stairs descended into darkness. The kind that didn't feel empty, but full. Full of memory. Full of waiting. They climbed down, the air thickening with every step. And when they reached the chamber below, she knew. He had been here before. Paintings lined the stone walls, rituals, circles, bloodlines. And in the center, on the floor, an identical symbol to the one Leo had drawn in his notebook. This place had waited for over 100 years. And now, its vessel had returned. Elena stepped closer to the center of the chamber. The symbol etched into the cold stone floor was unmistakable. It was the same one Leo had drawn obsessively for weeks. 6 lines intersected to form a jagged star, encircled by ancient runes she couldn't read. Around its edges were burn marks, as though fire had once danced across the surface in a precise pattern. It was far too exact, far too familiar to be coincidence. She knelt down and ran her fingers along the grooves. The stone was unnaturally smooth, worn not by time but by repetition. Rituals had happened here. This was a place of return, not worship. And if the drawings were truly memories, then Leo hadn't just seen this place in visions, he had stood on this very floor long ago. She turned to look at her son. Leo had gone utterly still. His gaze was fixed downward, eyes unfocused. Elena realized, with a sinking heart, that he was listening, though no sound touched her ears. His lips moved in silent rhythm, repeating words she couldn't hear. It was as if something beneath the stone whispered directly into his mind. In that moment, she didn't see her son. She saw something deeper looking through his eyes. Something ancient. Something that had never truly left. And it recognized its home. Suddenly, a powerful gust erupted from the floor, as if the chamber exhaled all at once. Elena stumbled backward, her spine slamming against the stone wall. The air was glacial, seeping into her bones, stealing her breath. Dust rose in clouds, the torch from her phone flickering erratically before dying altogether. Total darkness swallowed the room. Panic gripped her, but Leo remained exactly where he stood, untouched, unmoved. The cold didn't seem to affect him. If anything, he looked calm. At peace. A faint smile curled at the corners of his mouth, though his eyes remained empty. Elena called out, but her voice died before it reached him. Not because she had lost her voice, but because sound didn't seem to carry in this space anymore. The chamber had detached from the world above. Time here flowed differently. It felt like a pocket torn from the fabric of reality, sustained by memory and something far older than logic. She crawled toward her son through the suffocating cold, heart pounding with the knowledge that something had been awakened. It wasn't finished. And it wasn't going to let them leave so easily. Fighting the paralyzing cold, Elena reached Leo and pulled him into her arms. His body was limp, but still warm, still alive. He blinked slowly, as if awakening from a dream, but offered no resistance as she dragged him toward the stairs. Whatever trance had held him began to fade the moment they crossed the edge of the symbol. As they climbed, the air grew thicker, not with dust but with presence. A pressure weighed on her back, heavy and growing. Something followed. Not footsteps, intention. Like a gaze made physical. The feeling of being watched by something that shouldn't have eyes. At the top of the stairs, she shoved the trapdoor open and pushed Leo out first. The light of dusk barely filtered through the collapsed roof, but it felt like salvation. She scrambled out and shut the door behind them, the iron screeching in protest. The chapel was darker now. The shadows stretched longer than they should. The broken stained glass window no longer reflected light, it absorbed it. And in the silence, Elena swore she heard breathing. Not her own. Not Leo's. Something else had come up with them. Back at the apartment, Elena didn't sleep. She sat at the edge of Leo's bed, watching him as he lay still under the covers. Hours passed. The city's noises faded. Then, in the middle of the night, Leo stirred. His eyes remained closed, but his mouth moved. The same guttural language spilled from his lips, smoother now, fluent and fluid like a native speaker returning to his tongue after years of silence. His hands moved in rhythm, as though tracing symbols in the air. His voice wasn't his own anymore, deeper, older, carrying weight that echoed across the room. She recorded it this time. The sound made her skin crawl, her heartbeat unsteady. When she played it back, the recording glitched violently, the phone screen distorting with every syllable. The language wasn't dead. It was remembered. Not learned. Leo wasn't being possessed. He was returning. Desperate for answers, Elena contacted a local university the next day. She had found the name of a professor specializing in regional folklore and ancient spiritual traditions, Dr. Karol Havel. He agreed to meet her after she mentioned the rock van name. His office was filled with old books and relics, each shelf telling silent stories of the city's darker past. When Elena showed him the sketch of the symbol and the photo of Leo next to the boy from 1913, his expression hardened. He explained that the rock van bloodline was considered cursed, not out of myth, but fear. According to legend, the rock vans were not worshippers of gods, but keepers of entities older than religion, vessels that bridged the world of the living in something that should remain locked away. Each generation was said to carry the spark of that connection, but if the spark found its match, the vessel would awaken completely. He warned her that what had begun could not be undone. The moment Leo stepped into the chapel, he had reconnected with a cycle long dormant. A cycle that only ended in one of two ways, consumption or sacrifice. Elena left the office with her stomach in knots. She had come to Prague searching for truth. What she found was prophecy. And it had already begun. Elena had made up her mind, she would take Leo and leave Prague immediately. It didn't matter where they went. Away was enough. She booked a night train, packed in silence, and left the apartment before dawn while the streets were still damp from rain. Leo followed without question, drowsy but calm, as if part of him knew what was coming. But as their taxi approached the edge of the city, the air began to shift. The sky, once clear, turned an unnatural shade of gray. Trees on the roadside blurred, bending in directions they shouldn't. The streetlights began flickering in perfect sync, one after another, like falling dominoes. The driver, silent until then, suddenly stopped the car just a kilometer from the city's outer road and muttered that he couldn't go further. When Elena pressed him, his hands trembled. He turned around and told her, in a voice that didn't sound entirely like his own, that it was not a good time to leave. That the road wasn't safe. That someone would follow. Then, as if waking from a trance, he blinked and asked where they were going again, forgetting the entire exchange. Elena tried again, using another cab, then another. Each time, something interfered. Routes were closed. Roads were blocked by construction with no workers in sight. Her phone's map app glitched, showing their location as circling the same block over and over. When she attempted to walk with Leo, he collapsed after only a few steps, breathing heavily as though some unseen pressure was crushing him. She realized the city wasn't letting them go. Whatever force had awoken beneath the chapel was not finished with them. The cycle wasn't done. Prague had closed its gates, not for the living, but for what lived inside her son. Back in the apartment, Elena began noticing pages appearing on Leo's desk. They were sketches, detailed, technical, not the drawings of a child but architectural blueprints. Ancient structures rendered in perfect scale, each floor, stairwell, and corridor laid out meticulously in pencil. Some bore runes along the margins, others marked with dots and blood-red ink she hadn't given him. She confronted Leo, but he offered no explanation, just a distant stare and the same phrase repeated softly under his breath, "It's already here." Elena took one of the drawings to an architect she had met once, claiming it was from a historical archive. The man studied it with growing confusion. The structure didn't match any known Gothic, Romanesque, or Byzantine design. It was older, non-linear, almost labyrinthine, like something designed for ritual, not function. Even stranger, the paper aged overnight. What had been new white sheets turned yellow and brittle, the ink fading like it had been drawn decades ago. And yet Leo produced more, every day, more blueprints filled his desk, mapping something he had never seen, but clearly remembered. One drawing showed a room shaped like an inverted cross, with stone columns that reached through the ceiling and into open voids. Another displayed a subterranean chamber beneath Prague, with a name written in the margin in the same ancient language he had spoken in his sleep. Elena realized he wasn't creating these buildings. He was rebuilding them. Piece by piece. Haunted by the drawings, Elena decided to return to the chapel. She needed to know what had been triggered, what had truly awakened when Leo stepped inside. She retraced her steps through the twisting alleys and wooded paths, her phone guiding her through GPS coordinates she had saved on their first visit. But when she arrived, the chapel was gone. In its place stood a solid brick wall, built hastily but sealed tight. No entrance. No signs of ruin. It was as if the chapel had been swallowed overnight. Confused, she checked her GPS again, certain she had the right location, but the pin moved erratically on her screen, jumping in jagged patterns like it was being scrambled. Elena asked around the area, speaking to locals who lived just a few blocks away. No one remembered a chapel. They described the plot of land as vacant for years. One older man insisted nothing had ever been there except trees and fog. He chuckled when she asked about ruins, then stopped laughing abruptly and muttered something about bad places coming back. Back at the university, she checked the archives. Every record of the chapel's location had vanished. Scans of the old photo she had from the 1900s now showed an empty courtyard. The original paper print was blank. It wasn't just hidden. It had been erased, rewritten in reality itself, as though the past had realigned to protect a secret. The first time Elena noticed the figure, it was in the bathroom mirror. She was brushing Leo's hair when, just behind her shoulder, she saw a tall, dark silhouette. Its head was bowed, limbs too long for the frame of the doorway. But when she turned, there was nothing there. The hall was empty. She looked back into the mirror. It was gone. She tried to dismiss it as exhaustion. But then came the others. In the kitchen window at night, she saw faces watching from the street, pale and hollow-eyed, but the street below was deserted. In puddles, car mirrors, even the reflection in a spoon, figures lurked just behind her. Always watching, never seen by the eye alone. They didn't move. They waited. Leo, meanwhile, had stopped reacting to his reflection altogether. In fact, he avoided mirrors completely. Sometimes, Elena caught him staring into one for hours, not looking at himself, but something behind the glass. His eyes wide. His mouth trembling. Once, he whispered that the people in the mirror weren't dead. Not exactly. They were trapped. It was just after midnight when Elena heard the scratching sound. She rushed to Leo's room, expecting to find him awake. But the bed was empty. The door creaked open further to reveal her son standing barefoot in the hallway, facing the wall. His hand moved slowly, dragging something sharp along the plaster. When she got closer, she saw it was a broken piece of glass, held tightly in his palm, blood dripping as he carved strange shapes into the wall. The symbols were exact. Too exact for a child. Not chaotic or random, methodical, layered, repeating. Some spiraled into one another, others branched off like veins. Each was about the same size as the runes in the underground chamber. Elena called his name, but he didn't react. His eyes were closed. He was sleepwalking, entranced by something beyond her understanding. When she tried to pull him away, his body stiffened, resisting with strength far beyond his years. Only when the last rune was complete did his hand go limp, and he collapsed into her arms. The next morning, the symbols had bled through the wall paint, refusing to be scrubbed. And in the daylight, they hummed faintly, like distant voices behind a wall, whispering. Elena knew they were no longer safe, not even inside their own home. Whatever had been unlocked. It was still writing its way in. It was during a cold, overcast morning when Mrs. Kovacs, the elderly woman from the apartment next door, approached Elena in the hallway. Her eyes were heavy with concern, her hands trembling as she clutched an old rosary. She hadn't spoken much before, but now she moved with purpose, as if burdened with a secret too long kept. She told Elena that the apartment had not always been like this. That the air hadn't always felt so heavy. That before Elena and her son moved in, the rooms were ordinary, quiet, unremarkable, even boring. But now, something had shifted. Mrs. Kovacs said she no longer heard natural sounds through the walls, no footsteps, no voices, no laughter or television. Instead, there were the echoes. She described them as wet, dragging noises. Like something crawling. At night, she heard knocks in threes, always around 3:33 a.m. Her dog refused to go near the shared wall, and once barked at the floorboards until his mouth bled. She swore that the smell of sulfur leaked through the ventilation at night, despite no incense or candles being lit. Elena tried to brush it off, to rationalize it. But Mrs. Kovacs ended their conversation with something that struck her deeply. She said that sometimes she passed by Elena's front door and saw another woman standing there. Someone who wore Elena's clothes, had her posture, but who didn't blink. Someone who didn't breathe. And yet, Elena had never left the apartment at those hours. The building itself seemed to respond. Hallways grew darker. Paint peeled in fresh strips overnight. The walls no longer held sound the way they used to. The place was no longer just haunted. It was changing, from the inside out. One sleepless night, driven by the strange humming that now pulsed from the walls, Elena began to tear at the floorboards in Leo's room. The noise seemed to come from beneath. There, under the layers of old wood and dust, she found something tucked between two beams, an envelope, yellowed and fraying, with the edges crumbling at her touch. The name written on the envelope was not hers, but it was familiar, Marta Slezak. She had seen the name once, briefly, in the building's old rental ledger. A single line. No forwarding address. No departure date. The letter inside was written in a tight, frantic hand, addressed to any mother who finds this. It spoke of a son named Emil, who had begun drawing impossible symbols and speaking in unknown tongues after wandering into a hidden church in Prague's old town. Marta begged whoever found the letter to leave immediately, to burn the symbols if they appeared, and to never look directly into the eyes of their child during sleep. She described exactly what Elena had been experiencing. The sketches. The shadows. The dreams that turned real. Marta warned that the presence, once awakened, would not rest until a task was fulfilled, a ritual completed that had been left undone generations ago. The last line of the letter chilled Elena: if he starts building the door, it's already too late. Pray he never finishes it. And beneath that line was a drawing of the same circular symbol Leo had carved, only this one had a crack through the middle, like it had been broken once, and was now mending. It was just before dawn when Elena heard the soft dragging sounds coming from Leo's bedroom again. She rushed inside, only to find him kneeling before the closet, his face blank, hands working swiftly as if guided by muscle memory rather than thought. Inside, he had created a strange structure, a frame of sorts, using broken chair legs, coat hangers, nails, and strips torn from his bed sheets. It was crude but symmetrical, almost ceremonial. The frame was shaped like an arch, with a circle at the center drawn in charcoal and red lipstick. Elena pulled him away, but his fingers clung to the frame like roots to soil. Only when she whispered his name did he blink back to himself, confused and shaking. She dismantled the structure, piece by piece, tossing it into a black bag and taking it to the dumpster that same hour. But by the following evening, it was back. This time, more complete. Now the frame had steps leading into it, for shallow ones, built from blocks he had unscrewed from the bookshelf. The symbol at the center glowed faintly under blacklight, revealing markings invisible in normal light. The air inside the closet had grown colder, denser, as though the space within was expanding. The door he was building wasn't just metaphorical. Leo wasn't making a toy. He was rebuilding a passage. That night, Elena's sleep was deeper than it had been in weeks. Not peaceful, forced. It felt like she had been pulled under. In her dream, she stood in an endless hallway lined with doors, each identical, painted black, and without handles. The walls bled, the lights above swung without wind, casting shadows in random directions. Then one door opened, not by her hand, but by unseen force. On the other side, she saw Leo. But he wasn't her son. He was older. Paler. His eyes were glassy, skin translucent like wet paper. He stood behind an arch identical to the one he had built in his closet, framed in fire and bone. Behind him, massive gears turned in a ceilingless void, grinding against one another in painful harmony. Chanting echoed, growing louder, though no mouths moved. He looked at her and raised his hand slowly, not in greeting, but in farewell. Then, with a thunderous crack, the arch behind him lit up with violet flame, and something reached out. A clawed, brittle hand that rested gently on his shoulder. Elena screamed herself awake. But the scream didn't echo in her bedroom. It echoed back, from her closet. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains like nothing had happened. But when Elena sat up, pain surged through her forearms. She looked down to find blood dried in thin lines, like cuts from a fine blade. Dozens of them. Each forming runes she had seen before, on the chapel walls, in Leo's blueprints, and now in her own skin. They weren't random. They were symmetrical, aligned in spirals, as if her body had become a vessel, a map. Panicked, she rushed to the bathroom. Her reflection looked tired, pale, but something else was off. Her eyes didn't move in perfect sync. A fraction of a second delay, barely perceptible, but undeniably wrong. She washed the wounds, but they didn't sting. They didn't behave like normal cuts. They were already scabbing over in complex geometric patterns, and she noticed one in particular mirrored the broken symbol from Marta's letter. The crack was gone. The symbol was whole again. Elena realized then, she was no longer just protecting Leo from something external. She was part of the ritual now. Bound to it. Branded by it. And Leo was no longer the only one being prepared. Desperate for answers, Elena made the bold decision to travel to Prague, where she hoped to uncover the truth about the haunting symbols and the mysterious connection to her son. With her thoughts consumed by the cryptic messages in Marta's letter, she sought the help of a professor at the University of Prague, Dr. Viktor Sirek, historian specializing in occult symbols. His name had appeared in old articles related to the crypts and forgotten churches in Prague's hidden corners. She arrived at his office, a dimly lit room filled with shelves of dusty books and ancient artifacts. His eyes were sharp, a little too sharp, as if he had already known she was coming. He did not ask why she was there. Instead, he motioned to the table where several old tomes and dusty scrolls were spread out. He said nothing as he pointed to a particular page in a worn-out manuscript. There it was. The symbol that had appeared in Leo's drawings. The same one Elena had seen carved into her arms. Dr. Sirek explained that the symbol was part of an ancient and forbidden ritual, a doorway between this world and the next, used by a secret sect in the 17th century. The purpose of the ritual was not to open a door, but to bind souls to a realm beyond death, making them eternal. He continued, speaking in a low, almost hypnotic tone, warning Elena that the ritual was not just a historical curiosity. It was still alive. If the ritual was completed, the consequences would be irreversible. The doorway that Leo was unknowingly building would open, and once opened, the veil between worlds would be permanently torn. His eyes fixed on her, unblinking. "Your son, and you," he whispered, "are the final pieces." Elena felt a shiver crawl up her spine. "You must stop him before it's too late." A few days after meeting Dr. Sirek, Elena returned to her apartment, exhausted from her travels. She stepped into the dimly lit hallway and pressed her hand against the door, trying to find a moment of peace. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. That's when the phone rang. Her heart skipped as she recognized Leo's number flashing on the screen. She picked up the receiver, her voice filled with anxiety. "Leo?" she asked softly, almost relieved to hear his voice again. But it wasn't his voice. The voice that came through was hollow, mechanical, distorted. It sounded like Leo, but not quite. The voice was flat, unnatural. "He is coming for you, Mother," it said. The words felt wrong, jarring, as though they were being spoken by something other than Leo. Something that had borrowed his voice, twisted it into a tool of manipulation. "Elena," the voice continued, now dripping with menace, "you cannot stop what has already begun. You are the key. And the door is already open." A chill ran down her spine. She tried to speak, to call out to Leo, but the line went dead, and the call abruptly ended. She stood there, frozen, the weight of the voice pressing down on her chest. Something had changed. Her son was no longer just the innocent child she once knew. Something had taken root in him. That night, Elena found herself unable to sleep. The events of the day replayed in her mind, but the more she thought about them, the more her instincts screamed at her to leave, to run far away. But it was too late. She had already entered a realm she couldn't escape. She walked into Leo's room once again, driven by a force she didn't fully understand. There, in the darkened corner, the makeshift door Leo had been building pulsated with an eerie, rhythmic hum. The shape of the doorframe had changed, it was no longer just a crude structure. It had become something, alive. The wood groaned as if it had its own heartbeat, thumping in time with the rising tension in the room. Elena stepped closer, her hand trembling as she reached for the cold surface. As soon as her fingers touched the wood, she felt a sharp, electric jolt that sent a wave of nausea through her. The wood was no longer just wood, it felt like something ancient, something dead and alive at once. And then, from the other side, she heard a low, guttural growl. Her breath caught in her throat. She yanked her hand away, stumbling back toward the door. But the growl continued. Low. Repeating. It was waiting. Sleep, when it finally came, was far from restful. Elena's dreams were not her own. They belonged to something far older, far darker. She stood in the center of a vast, decaying hall, the air thick with incense and the scent of decay. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries that seemed to shift and change with each passing second. And there, at the center of the hall, was Leo. But he wasn't her son anymore. His eyes were wide and glassy, staring at the ceiling, unblinking. His body was draped in tattered robes, and around him, in a perfect circle, were figures cloaked in shadow. They chanted in an ancient language, their voices rising and falling in unison. Leo's hands were raised above his head, as if in prayer, but it wasn't a prayer. It was a summoning. Elena tried to reach him, but her feet were bound to the floor. She could not move. The figures in the circle turned toward her. Their faces were nothing but dark voids, but their gaze pierced through her soul, and in their collective gaze, Elena saw the truth. The ritual was happening. The ceremony was nearing its climax. And she was the one who had unwittingly led them here. But Leo was the vessel. He was the key to something far worse than she had ever imagined. The door was opening. The following morning, Elena felt a dread she couldn't shake off. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. Her thoughts were consumed with Leo, what he had become, what he was about to do. When she entered his room, there he was, standing by the door. His small, fragile body seemed to have changed overnight. His eyes were hollow, like two black voids, and his skin was deathly pale, as though it had been drained of life. He was looking at her, but it wasn't him, not the Leo she knew. He raised his hand, a slow, deliberate motion, beckoning her closer. "Come to me, Mama," he whispered, though his lips didn't move. His voice wasn't his voice anymore. It was cold, distant, and it echoed in her mind. "Elena," he said again, his voice reverberating through the room. "It's time. Come closer. I need you." Her heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to run, to grab him and pull him away from whatever had taken control of him. But her feet were rooted to the floor, as if the very room was binding her, forcing her to approach. The door behind him throbbed with dark energy, as if it too were calling her, begging her to cross the threshold. But she knew. If she stepped through that door, there would be no turning back. Leo was waiting, and so was something much darker. With each step she took back from Leo, a feeling of cold dread enveloped Elena, pulling her deeper into a sense of helplessness. Her heart raced, and the room felt smaller, more oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. The boy who had once been her light, her reason for living, now stood as a hollow shell, his eyes dark voids that seemed to hold the weight of an endless nightmare. She didn't want to get closer, but the pull of the door was unbearable. The air crackled with tension, the room vibrating as though something ancient stirred within the walls. She glanced at Leo once more, his empty gaze locking with hers, and for the first time, Elena saw something, flicker behind his eyes, a trace of the boy she once knew. But it was fleeting. The moment passed, and the darkness behind his eyes grew stronger. "Leo," she whispered, voice breaking, her body trembling. "Please, fight it. You have to fight it." But the creature before her did not respond. Instead, it stepped forward, slow and deliberate, dragging Elena back toward the door with a force that seemed beyond human. She could feel the pull now, the compulsion to move closer, to enter the doorway. It was as if the very fabric of reality had bent to the will of whatever force had taken control of Leo. The dark whispers grew louder, reverberating in her mind. They called to her. They urged her to step through. But Elena shook her head, pulling herself away. She could not, would not, let the door take her. She turned to flee, to escape, but something caught her leg, pulling her back down to the ground. She screamed, but no one was there to hear her. Elena struggled to stand, her hands shaking as she gripped the floor for support. Her heart hammered in her chest as she looked back at the door. It was no longer just an ominous, pulsating frame. It had opened. The blackness beyond it was not simply dark, it was a void, a space that seemed to suck in the very light around it. The shadows bent and writhed within, coiling like snakes, and Elena felt as if the very essence of life was being drained from the room. From the center of the void, a low hum vibrated through her bones. It was the sound of the ritual reaching its final stage. The air grew thick, stifling, pressing down on her chest with an intensity that left her breathless. Leo was standing near the threshold, his body now rigid, as though he too had become a part of the doorway. His once warm features were completely absent, replaced by a blank, lifeless stare. His arms were outstretched toward the darkness, as if he was reaching for something beyond. "Elena," he whispered, his voice a distorted echo from the void, "come to me, step through." The words slithered into her mind like venom, poisonous and corrosive. Elena's mind screamed for her to leave, but her body betrayed her, inching closer to the opening. The door had become a force of nature itself, and Elena was helpless against its pull. She had to stop it. With every ounce of strength she had left, Elena tore her gaze away from Leo and made a dash for the window. The force behind the door grew stronger, the whispers louder, but she had to get out. As Elena reached for the window, ready to break it open and escape into the cold night air, she froze. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, growing louder with each passing second. She spun around, her pulse racing, expecting to see Leo, or some manifestation of him. But it wasn't Leo. In the dim light of the hallway stood a figure, tall, shrouded in shadow, with a face hidden beneath a hood. The figure seemed to glide rather than walk, its feet never truly touching the ground. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the figure, though she had never seen it in person before. It was the same figure from her dream, the one that had appeared in the shadows of the ceremonial hall, chanting along with the cloaked figures. The same one that had reached out for her in the darkness. This time, it was real. The figure stepped forward, and its presence seemed to suffocate the very air in the room. Elena backed away, her feet stumbling over the floor, but the figure was faster, its movements smooth and deliberate. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice chilling and inhuman, like the scraping of nails on a chalkboard. "It's already begun." The word sent a tremor of terror through her, and for a moment, she was paralyzed, her body refusing to move. The figure raised a hand, and the door to Leo's room slammed shut, trapping Elena inside. Her heart sank as the finality of the gesture hit her. She was trapped. With the door closed, Elena was left with the dark figure, its shape growing clearer in the dim light. The figure lowered its hood, revealing a face that was both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Its features were distorted, as if they were shifting, blending into the shadows themselves. The figure spoke again, its voice more distinct this time. "I am the keeper of the ritual," it said, its words echoing with an eerie authority. "I am the one who ensures that the door remains open." Elena's mind raced. The keeper of the ritual? The cult leader? Was this the being responsible for Leo's possession, for the ritual that was being carried out? "What have you done to my son?" Elena demanded, her voice trembling. The figure smiled, a twisted, unsettling expression that seemed to twist the air around it. "He is the key, Elena," the figure explained, its voice resonating in her bones. "He has always been the key. And now, the door is open. There is no turning back." A cold chill swept through the room as the figure stepped closer. Elena's heart raced with terror, but she refused to back down. She would not let this thing claim her son. There was no more room for hesitation. Elena's fear transformed into a burning determination, a fierce need to protect her son from whatever dark force had taken hold of him. She glared at the keeper of the ritual, her hands trembling, but her resolve solid. "You won't take him," Elena spat, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "I will stop you." The figure laughed, a low, mocking sound that reverberated through the room. It was as if Elena's defiance meant nothing, as if she were nothing more than a fly trapped in a spider's web. "You cannot stop what has already begun," the figure repeated. "The ritual will be completed. Your son will fulfill his destiny. You have no power here." But Elena was undeterred. She would find a way to stop the ritual, to save Leo from whatever terrible fate awaited him. Her eyes locked onto the figures, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Elena felt a surge of power. She could do this. She had to. She took a step forward, ready to confront the keeper, ready to face whatever horrors awaited her. Elena stood tall, her body trembling but her resolve unshaken. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run, to escape, to leave the nightmare behind. But she couldn't. Not when Leo was still trapped in this hellish grasp. She advanced, step by step, toward the keeper of the ritual. The figure loomed over her, the darkness surrounding it more oppressive than ever. The air crackled with dark energy, as if the very space between them was a battlefield. Elena could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. But her determination fueled her. "I will stop you," she whispered through gritted teeth, the words feeling foreign but necessary. "I will save my son." The keeper's smile twisted into something darker, almost predatory. It was as if it knew the battle was far from over, as if it could feel her fear, yet it did not falter. "You cannot stop what has already begun," the keeper repeated, its voice as cold as death itself. But Elena was not listening anymore. With a sudden movement, she reached into the folds of her coat and pulled out a small silver cross, a gift from her mother. The pendant shone brightly in the dim light, the silver glowing with an ethereal energy. It had been a symbol of hope, of faith, something her mother had told her would protect her in dark times. Clutching it tightly, Elena held it up toward the keeper. A blast of light erupted from the cross, pushing the shadowy figure back. For a moment, the keeper hesitated, as though the light had burned it. But then the figure quickly recovered, its face twisting in rage. It let out an ear-splitting screech that rattled the very walls of the room. The keeper's screech reverberated through the air, a horrific sound that seemed to crack the very foundations of the house. Elena felt the ground beneath her feet begin to shake violently. The room quaked as if some ancient power was being awakened, as if the very structure of reality itself was beginning to unravel. The door, still open, pulsed with dark energy, each beat like the heartbeat of something ancient and malevolent. The shadows within the void thickened, swirling around as if alive, reaching for Elena, tugging at her with a force so strong it felt like she was being torn apart from the inside out. Elena stumbled, clutching the silver cross tighter, her feet slipping on the shaking floor. She felt the presence of something dark, something far more dangerous than the keeper, something that had been hiding within the void beyond the door. The figure before her stepped back, its face no longer human but a grotesque mask of shadows and writhing forms. It was retreating, as if something far more powerful than itself was about to take control. The air was thick with dread, and Elena's heart pounded in her chest. She had to act fast. Suddenly, Elena's attention was drawn back to Leo, who had remained motionless near the door. His body began to shake violently, as if some force were trying to tear him apart from the inside. His eyes rolled back in his head, his mouth opening and closing as if he were gasping for air. "Elena," a voice whispered faintly, Leo's voice, barely audible over the chaos in the room. It was then that Elena realized, this wasn't just about the ritual. Leo had become a vessel, a living conduit for something far darker. Whatever had been sealed away in the void beyond the door was using him, was trying to pull him through. Desperation surged through her. She rushed to Leo's side, reaching out for him, her heart breaking as she saw the torment in his eyes. This wasn't her son anymore. Not entirely. But there was a flicker of recognition, a small sign of his presence that made her believe, he was still there. She refused to give up on him. The shaking of the room intensified as the keeper of the ritual stood back, watching the scene unfold. Elena's vision blurred with the shaking, but she couldn't look away. She had come so far, and she wouldn't let the darkness claim her son. The doorway beyond Leo was wide open now, its edges glowing with an unholy light. The shadows surged, crawling closer to Leo's body, reaching for him with grotesque arms, pulling him toward the void. Elena could hear the whispers again, louder this time, urging her to step back, to let go, to accept the fate that had been written for her. But Elena didn't listen. Her fingers dug into Leo's trembling body, holding on with everything she had. The silver cross in her other hand began to burn with an intensity she hadn't felt before, its light expanding to fill the room. And then, just as the darkness threatened to engulf them both, Elena's voice broke through the whispers, steady and resolute. "Not today," she said, her words more powerful than anything she had ever spoken. With a final, resounding crash, the door slammed shut. The darkness that had once consumed the room retreated, dissipating as if it had never been there. The shadows that had been clawing at the walls and floor faded, leaving behind only the dim glow of the silver cross. Leo collapsed into Elena's arms, his body still trembling, but the malevolent presence that had filled the room was gone. The void beyond the door had closed, leaving no trace of its existence. Elena held him tightly, not yet knowing what the cost would be, but she had saved him. At least, for now. But as she looked around, the feeling of unease lingered. The room was still, but something deep within Elena told her that this was not over. Whatever had been unleashed could not be contained forever. The ritual had been interrupted, but the force behind it was far from gone. As Elena clutched Leo to her chest, she knew the fight was only just beginning. The darkness had retreated for now, but it would come again, and she would have to be ready. That was our story for tonight. Do you think it's just an ordinary tale, or is there something more to it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. See you, if you still dare to watch next time.